should probably get this hat fixed. Oh! Hey there! Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla, and this is Werezilla's Retrospective's new location, because redundancy is redundant. Now, as for what we're talking about today, well, this March, two very anticipated movies for me personally are being released. The first of which being Kong, Skull Island. When I reviewed the 70s remake of King Kong and its awful sequel, I neglected to mention something very important. The original film is what inspired me to go to film school and set me on the path I'm on now. I immersed myself in the behind the scenes of all the films. I binge-watched as many Kong movies that were available to me, opening the door for me to start studying more movies and how they're made, and eventually decided I wanted to be a part of it. So naturally, the release of a new King Kong movie is not only important to me, but Werezilla's Retrospective itself, given the most debated video I've ever done was on the 70s Kong. But really, who cares about this movie? We're here to talk about the battle that Kong Skull Island is the setup for. A rematch between two classic monsters, the eighth wonder of the world, facing off against the king of the monsters. Although an actual brawl between the two monsters is logistically impossible because of the scale of both characters, the impact both films have had on cinema is undeniable. That's probably because both the original King Kong and the original Godzilla aren't just good monster flicks. They are great films in general. The story of how even the mightiest of beings can have a weakness, or how horrifying destruction on a massive scale really is. The implications of both really make you think. What I'm about to say isn't a bad thing in and of itself, but the spectacle is placed above the implications in later films for both monsters, including their crossover in 1962. I think we all know at this point, in the 2004 Godzilla, its 2018 sequel, and this March's Kong Skull Island are priming us for a big screen rematch in 2020. But what about the original King Kong vs. Godzilla? What was that movie like? How did it turn out? Well, that's what this video is all about. When I was a kid watching these movies, I had, issues with this film. Now, I've mellowed out in the past decade or so, but in terms of quality, well, let's just say the Big G and Kong have had better. Though this is the first time both monsters were in color. There's a plus. But enough about that. Enough about the setup. Let us begin. Now, I'm watching the English dub of this movie, which unfortunately means we start with a UN report about two of the movie's plot points, glaciers moving towards Japan, and berries found on the remote Faroe Island. We could have gotten this info from the movie itself, but apparently the people in charge of dubbing the movie think we're morons. This isn't the only addition added by the dub, and I think one of the characters from the movie sums up these sequences best.
Because it's dull and boring and without imagination.
The actual movie begins with the head of a pharmaceutical company, Mr. Taco, ordering an expedition to Faroe Island to get more of the berries. At least that's the official reason. Apparently there's something else on the island he wants his lackey, Sakurai, to bring back with. A monster the natives on the island worship as a god.
Sounds like a fairy tale, Doctor. Does a giant creature exist here? Since you ask my opinion, my answer is yes. A giant monster? He must be putting us on.
Right, because we've never seen a giant monster before in the two previous Godzilla movies. Oh, wait! At least Taco and this scientist guy think it's genuine, believing he can use this monster on the island to improve his company's public image. This is starting to sound a lot like the plot to the first Kong remake. Not off to a good start. Though at least Taco here is a much more likable character than Fred Wilson. After a scene of Sakurai having dinner with his sister Rumiko and her boyfriend Fujita, the latter of whom is loading Chekhov's gun with a super strong wire he made, we cut to a submarine investigating the approaching glaciers. Now remember when I talked about the Gamera movies and I was confused as to why they had American characters speaking English and yet the dubbers decided to dub over them anyway? That is the case for the entire submarine crew.
Captain, water temperature is 68 degrees. 68 degrees? It can't be. There aren't any warm currents in the Arctic Ocean. Check that temperature. Yes, sir.
Captain, I see a strange light behind the ice.
I think it's our ADR guy. Actually, it turns out it's Godzilla, who escapes the ice he was trapped in at the end of Godzilla Raids Again. It's It's a shame the UN guys in the dub added reports don't remember the events of that movie.
I tend to classify him as a prehistoric species of dinosaur. Possibly a cross between the gigantic Tyrannosaurus rex and the Stegosaurus, which is sometimes known as the plated dinosaur. Roughly, this particular form of reptile existed somewhere between 97 and 125 million years ago.
Well, that seems an impossibly long period of time for anything to remain alive, even frozen inside of an iceberg.
The fact that Godzilla is here and alive forces us to reconsider many theories on suspended animation.
Everything I hear about this thing makes me like it less.
But there's some good news. This idiocy is contained only to the dub added reports. The rest of the movie doesn't reflect this obliviousness to the previous Godzilla movies. Well, except in one area, but we'll get to that. So, while Godzilla is destroying a force of toy tanks, Sakurai arrives on Faroe Island, where he's greeted by the natives. They're obviously played by Japanese actors in blackface, and I think I understand why that is. They're trying to replicate the look of the natives of Skull Island in the original film. That may not have actually been necessary. Skull Island is located in the Indian Ocean, so having people who are not black, but rather Japanese without the blackface, might have actually been more geographically accurate than the original film. Later that night, a giant octopus attacks the village, cueing the arrival of Kong, and oh my god! What's wrong with your face? Okay then. Out of all of the King Kong movies, 4 of them had him portrayed as a guy in a suit. This one probably has the worst costume of the bunch. I have a theory as to why that is, but again, we'll get to that later. Kong knocks over the native's wall, that doesn't look like it would have held him back in the first place, and forces the octopus back into the ocean. What a coincidence! That's what the crew ended up doing to 3 of the live octopuses when they were done filming this scene. The 4th one was eaten by the film's special effects director, Eiji Tebasaraya. Not sure if that counts as animal abuse, but the fact that they got it to move by spraying it with a fire extinguisher is probably closer to the real deal. Kong drinks some of the native's berry juice, which makes him a little tipsy, and then their chanting makes him fall asleep. And I genuinely cannot decide whether or not this song is either annoying or catchy. So Sakurai brings Kong onto his ship, with Tako being airlifted onto the ship before it arrives in Japan.
Boy, you did a wonderful job. A wonderful job indeed. Wonderful. Wonderful. There! King Kong!
I think he's found a hero.
Stop!
Don't, that's dynamite. Press that lever and pow goes Kong.
Pow?
Ah, yes. Pow? Proving you don't need to say actual words in order to be racist. Of course, the dynamite was established for a reason, as Kong wakes up during the trip, and despite a comical attempt by Tako to stop the others from detonating it, it ends up being him who pulls the trigger himself. Of course, it doesn't actually hurt Kong, and he swims away. This leads to something big. He and Godzilla appear together on screen. The fight doesn't last very long. In fact, I can barely call it a fight, but I like it. Kong realizes Godzilla has the advantage, what with the atomic breath, and backs down. And I like Godzilla swinging his arms as if he's trying to goad Kong. It's great.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
Some toy trucks try to dig a hole to trap Godzilla, but that doesn't work. What does ward him off from attacking Tokyo, for some reason, is power lines. Funny, I seem to remember Godzilla was unhindered by power lines in the original movie, so what has happened in the intervening years since that made him weak to it? And wait, what's this dumbass saying now? Electricity makes Kong stronger and therefore the lines won't stop him? What? This is one of the reasons why I did not like this movie growing up. This monster that Godzilla fights has the trappings for King Kong, but still feels a little off. What I didn't understand at the time was the reason why. Originally, this was going to be a battle not between Godzilla and King Kong, but rather between Godzilla and a giant Frankenstein's monster. Well, technically it goes back a little further than that. Willis O'Brien, the guy who did the effects for the original Kong, had an idea for a sequel where Kong fights a Frankenstein monster made from different animal parts. When that fell through, Toho came up with a similar idea with Godzilla, but after teaming up with Universal, they decided instead to have their iconic giant ape fight Toho's radioactive monster instead. As you can imagine, Kong getting stronger through exposure to electricity is a holdover from their original Frankenstein plans. It, plus Kong's size boost, is why as a kid I didn't acknowledge this as King Kong, calling it Kaiju Kong instead because of how different it is from the original. I've mellowed out since then, but I'm still not sure I like it for story purposes. Possibly to make up for this, Kaiju Kong stomps his way through the city, sees Fumiko in a train, and carries her off, climbing onto the Diet Building while he's surrounded by Japan's armed forces.
But we can't hold our fire for long. King Kong must not be allowed to escape.
At least, not until the movie King Kong escapes. Sakurai and Fujita managed to save Fumiko using the berry juice and a recording of the natives' chant, putting Kaiju Kong to sleep. Is it just me, or has Kong spent half this movie either passed out drunk or suffering from a hangover? At this point, everyone decides Kong is their best chance to stop Godzilla from reaching any other cities.
Kong versus Godzilla. If we are lucky, both will die. Both will die?
Boshodai? Seriously, what the hell is up with Tako's dubber? Takedo Takashima's performance is already over the top. No need to go overboard. So they fire Chekhov's gun using Fujita's super strong wires to transport Kaiju Kong to Godzilla's location, leading to a frankly one-sided fight. Despite Kaiju Kong having a good head start with an attempt to ambush Godzilla and playing dead at one point, it doesn't work, and Godzilla just wails on Kaiju Kong, burying him in rocks and setting the forest on fire so Kaiju Kong will burn to death while he's unconscious. However, before the audience can cry out bias, the earlier Frankenstein drafts of the movie spring into action, as Kaiju Kong is struck by lightning, giving him a second wind and forcing Godzilla back. I rather like this bit where Kaiju Kong stuffs a tree in Godzilla's mouth, referencing a sequence in the original Kong's battle with a T-Rex that didn't make it into the original film. The battle reaches a nearby pagoda, and if you've seen any Godzilla movie before, and I do mean any other Godzilla movie, you know exactly what is about to happen. After a small earthquake, or a devastating one thanks to the English dub adding in stock footage from the Mysterians, which they have been doing every time they show the UN reporters, Kaiju Kong swims off to sea, with Godzilla nowhere to be seen. Despite the rumors surrounding this movie, this is how it originally ended in both Japanese and American releases. The bigger difference being both monsters roared at the end of the Japanese release, kind of like how actors in a play come out on stage to bow to the audience. In the American release, we get one last bit of pointless UN footage wishing Kaiju Kong a safe trip back to Faroe Islands, and then only he roars. Even though Universal had a hand in this movie, the references to the original Kong are only in the form of recreations like the natives' aesthetics, Kong being taken away from the island, and Fumiko being carried off by Kong in the middle of a city, which, by the way, is the only reason she's even in this movie. She's otherwise superfluous. In fact, Tako is the only human character that really has any kind of motivation, takes actions to move the story along, or even has anything resembling a personality. It's a stereotype, but it's not the most offensive I've ever seen. The movie clearly wants Sakurai and Fujita to be the primary human characters, but the only reason I could tell the two apart was the fact that Fujita's actor, Kenji Sahara, appears in other Godzilla movies. By that same notion, if it wasn't for the fact that Kong is a giant ape and comes from a remote island, I wouldn't recognize him as the eighth wonder of the world, hence why I dubbed him Kaiju Kong partway through. The original idea involving the Frankenstein monster is the reason why, one I didn't consider when I was a kid back in 2006. Now that I'm older, however, I spotted things that weren't even on my radar, things that admittedly also hurt the movie, though they mostly stem from the English dub. As I hope I've made very clear at this point, the added scenes with the UN are pointless, not only adding nothing to the movie by telling us shit we already know, but in some cases, it actively contradicts lore from the previous Godzilla movies. And given Japan's history with the A-bomb, maybe you shouldn't change the dialogue between Japan's prime minister and various reporters to include the possibility of using it against Godzilla. It may be a go-to line for a monster movie here in America, but there's a reason the idea of using it is resisted by almost every character in Shin Godzilla. Let's not even get into altering the score of the movie, either replacing the original music with music from Creature from the Black Lagoon, or having no music at all. Now, on the part of the original Japanese crew, well, I mentioned the story problems and the mostly unneeded characters, but as for the effects, well, Godzilla looks okay. The eyes are a little close together, but at least it's not as bad as the cookie monster we'd get later. Kong, on the other hand, doesn't translate well to suitimation, and the reason I think is because Toho wanted to try a combination of effects. Keep Godzilla in a suit, but have Kong be animated through stop motion. I would have actually loved to see what this looks like, but I can't imagine it would have been very feasible, so they had to make a Kong suit instead, which might be why it looks as bad as it does. There is some brief stop motion in the final battle, which is so bad it's hilarious when you see the switch. The only bad effects I don't enjoy seeing, however, is the compositing, which is okay at the start, but seems to get worse as the movie progresses. I guess that's the downside of watching this movie years later, as the effects and the quality of your TV set when watching the movie improve. We'll find out next week if Kong Skull Island meshes with Legendary's Godzilla, because I wouldn't want it to run into the same problems this movie did. Because frankly, when you look at the original Kong, a 25-foot-tall ape that was vulnerable to machine gun fire, fighting against the original Godzilla, a 167-foot-tall, fire-spitting, radioactive, indestructible monster, would not be a real fight. I want Kong Skull Island to be good. I want the 2018 sequel to the legendary Godzilla to be good. I want the King Kong vs. Godzilla remake to be good. I want them to get the spirit of both characters, the respect both deserve. When people think of Kong and Godzilla, they should be focusing on the quality of the films themselves, the themes, the messages, the characters, the musical score, the special effects, and the impact that they had on film is what should be discussed, not who would win in a slugfest. Next time, we'll have a very special video concerning the other franchise that's getting the big screen treatment this month. Something more phenomenal.